Hello everyone, welcome back to FFG Live. We're here today to talk some Marvel Champions. I'm joined here by Caleb Grace. You are one of the designers of this game,
one of them.
correct? Yeah, awesome.
Known as the good-looking one.
Of course, I mean that's what I call you. We're here today to talk about the second scenario pack for Marvel Champions. So we talked a little bit about this at Gen Con in the in-flight report. We announced that it is the Wrecking Crew scenario pack. And now we're here to share a little bit more with everyone about it. I guess first off, so Wrecking Crew, what's up with that? Why the Wrecking Crew? Why are we going there?
Oh man, Wrecking Crew's old school.
It is.
I love the Wrecking Crew. I think what brought them to mind for me, I think they're like the original supervillain team in the Marvel comics. I could be wrong about that, but my first exposure to the Wrecking Crew was like the original Secret War crossover from like the 1980s, and they just made an impression. I just thought they were kind of hilarious. They looked like a bunch of guys that just like walked off a construction job and decided to be super criminals.
Yeah. They have a magic crowbar.
Yeah, their origin is just brilliant. Like when you read it, you're like, really? But it's so much fun. Yeah, so they're just a very colorful group. And they're really iconic. Like their costumes, I don't think they've really changed since the 1980s.
Yeah, there's a lot of like spandex and masks.
Yeah,
and
bright colors,
and,
like underwear on the outside.
Exactly.
But yeah, they're just really fascinating. You know, like they actually like beat up Thor at one point and trashed Avengers Mansion. So like even though they kind of look silly, they're like really formidable enemies.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've stuck together like all this time and they haven't really been reinvented, it just seemed like a fun place to start, kind of like really dig deep in the Marvel lore. And also, we wanted to come up with a scenario that would instantly be very different from everything else.
Definitely.
And so, as we get into it, you're going to see how this scenario is very unique in the way that it takes advantage of the fact that this is a four-person team.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so we just spoiled the big twist of the scenario, but people could probably guess that. Okay, so let's get into showing a couple cards, and we'll talk more about this scenario and sort of how it works. Looking at the scheme first. So the scheme is Breakout, is what it's called. So scenario contents: we've got Wrecker A, Thunderball A, Piledriver A, and Bulldozer A as villains.
Yeah, very, very heavy Canadian team.
Yeah.
Like Upper Minnesota. Like
Wrecker A.
Oh, how about that Thunderball, eh?
Oh, that Thunderball. Ooh, Piledriver. I tell you, Marty.
Don't you know, I saw him out and about there the other day.
So they have a version B for increased difficulty, and then they each have their own kind of encounter decks. You know, we set up some schemes as well, and we kind of get into it there. So tell me a little bit about this. So this scenario where you're fighting four villains at the same time.
At the same time.
How does this work? I assume they're not all going to activate every single round? That seems like
you hope not. That would be so busted. So we experimented with an early version where like maybe more than one might activate in the same round, and that got crazy really quick. So instead what you have is the idea of an active villain.
Sure.
And so the active villain is typically, I think, the villain who has the most threat on their scheme. So it's determined for you. It's kind of a fun little AI thing we try to do where we simulate like the villains are making their own decisions. The players have to react to, rather than the players deciding, I want him to be active. It's no, like the Wrecking Crew will decide who's going to mess you up that turn.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So one of them will activate each turn, but you still have to beat all of them, I assume.
That's correct.
To win.
Yeah, so the active villain is the one who will either scheme or attack, depending on what form you're in, hero or alter ego.
Sure.
But all four are in play at once, so you don't have to attack the active one. You could attack a different one, perhaps. And there are four schemes out at once, and so you can also choose which scheme that you want to remove threat from. So in that sense, you have a little bit of counterplay. If you're like, I really want this guy to be active because this other guy's kicking our butt, then you might try to remove a lot of threat from the scheme of
that's interesting.
the person you don't want to be active.
Because there's already like the way you can manipulate the villain by being like alter ego or hero, right? But now there's kind of an additional level of that by like, we need like Piledriver to be active. So.
Yeah, I mean ultimately you're using the same game mechanics. I don't think that we're adding too much right away. It's just this little extra choice of like, instead of having one main scheme that you're going after, you have 4 side schemes with the permanent keyword is going to keep them in place. So they're going to function a little different. But the main scheme's kind of just it's more or less a timer this time. They're not scheming on the main scheme.
Yeah.
They're each scheming on their own thing they're trying to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So even if there's only one villain activating each turn, that's still like a lot of extra damage that has to be dealt in order to win.
A little bit, yeah. If you think about like in a normal scenario, you have to defeat, like if you're playing standard, you would say Rhino, for example. You defeat Rhino 1, and then you go on to Rhino 2.
Right.
And in this mode, it's like there's no Wrecker 1, Wrecker 2. It's just Wrecker, Thunderball, and so on.
Sure.
So yeah, it ends up being a little bit more than average. But ultimately, it's comparable.
So you found that it's still pretty playable, like no matter what the player count is. Like if I'm taking them on solo, I'm still going to be okay.
Yeah, and again, that speaks to I think one of the strengths of the game, and and it's nice the modular nature of it. So if people do find it to be maybe just a little rough, they can tone it down through some of the alternate rules. Yeah. Or if they're like, hey, it's not hard enough.
Yeah.
You can always crank it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those villains have an A and a B side. The B side is hard.
They're actually 2 different cards. Yeah, we thought about making them double-sided.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately decided that might create confusion of did I defeat this one? Do I have to flip it over?
Sure. Yeah, so they're separate cards.
The rules just say like, hey, if you want a real hard mode, replace the A version with the B version. All right. And what's fun is because there's 4, you can actually, like I said, there's room to customize. So you might say, I want to use these 2 A versions and then these 2 B versions. So you can mix and match however you like.
I see a question in the chat here from Storms Bowler. How do you track the health of 4 different villains?
Well, you can either pen and paper, dice, tokens. If you have... say 2 friends with their core sets teaming up, you can use the extra dials however you like.
If you're playing solo, you could use the hero dials, right?
So it's really it's one of those things that we definitely talk about as a design team. Like, how are people going to track it? And we're like, our players are pretty smart. They'll figure that out.
There are ways.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of get into it and look at the leader of the Wrecking Crew. Do you want to give Wrecker a read there?
Sure, yeah. So Wrecker is just one of 4 villains. He has 2 scheme and 2 attack. He has the Wrecking Crew trait along with they all do. And so he has an ability that will trigger when he schemes and an ability that will trigger when he attacks. So when it says when Wrecker schemes, place the threat on his side scheme instead of the main scheme. And that's an ability that all the villains share.
They all share that.
That first line just tells you, it's more like a reminder than anything, that they're not trying to place threat on the main scheme. They're doing it to their side scheme. But then they each have a different ability that triggers when they attack. Or I guess they don't all have it, but a lot of them do.
Sure.
So Wrecker's other ability is when Wrecker is attacking, he gets +2 attack if it's undefended.
Ooh, that's gross.
Yeah, I really like it's it's a nasty choice, right?
I like to leave attacks undefended. I like to just tank them. Right. So that's pretty rough.
Yeah, you're like 2 attack. I could let that go undefended. Oh wait, but it doubles.
Yeah, plus a boost card.
Yeah, plus the boost.
That's gross.
Yeah, he's kind of an opportunist. I like that. Like, you don't turn your back on Wrecker.
So if each of the villains are kind of advancing their own side scheme rather than the main scheme, the nature of this scenario is much more like a brawl or a punch out, right? Like they're not trying to advance the scheme and rush through that way.
Yeah, the main scheme's still there, and it's still collecting threat kind of gradually, like over time. So there is this timer on the game. But yeah, the focus of this one is definitely more on the villains. There's 4 of them. They're doing a lot. They're really dealing out a lot of damage. So
it's like duking it out.
The greater danger, really comes from being KO'd. And all of their side schemes have some pretty nasty abilities too that will trigger once they hit 10 threat.
Sure.
And then they'll reset and then happen again if you're not careful.
Well, let's look at one of those.
Sure.
We've got Wrecker's card here, which is Day of Reckoning.
Yeah. So yeah, this design is actually something that Nate and I worked on together, and he loves these titles.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. What you guys have on record. Does using an ally to block count as a defended attack? Does that count as?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you just need to throw a body in front of that attack for it to be defended. So whether it's a hero or an ally, as long as someone exhausted to defend or was declared a defender, then it's considered to be defended.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yep.
So Wrecker's side scheme. So this card can't leave play while Wrecker is in play. So that's kind of shared across all these side schemes, right?
Yeah.
Like as long as that villain is out, the side scheme is going to remain.
Yeah, I think I misspoke. I think I said something about a keyword. And,
yeah,
and
said
I think that was like an early draft.
Right.
Yeah, I forgot that we found a more elegant solution around it.
You can get rid of it once you've taken down the
That's
villain.
right. That was the whole idea, and I think that's where our keyword in development kind of tripped us up, because you're like, wait a minute, I've defeated Wrecker, but now this keyword says it can't leave play.
Yeah.
That's right. It's coming back to me now.
So then, force response after threat is placed here. If there's 10 or more, 2 damage to each friendly character, so heroes and allies.
That's right.
And then remove all but 3 threat from this scheme.
Yeah, notable too that it's to each friendly character, so that will actually damage alter egos as well.
Yeah.
There's no hiding from the Day of Reckoning.
Yeah, you're going to get wrecked.
Yeah, and you'll notice too that when it resets, it doesn't go all the way back down to 0. It just goes down to 3.
Yeah, and it starts with 6 on it.
Yeah, it's I think they each start with a different value. His might be the highest, because I think we wanted Wrecker to be the active villain on the first turn.
Yeah, that's pretty nasty. And then he's got a card from his deck here, which is Wrecker's Command. So this is an attachment that slots onto him, gives him +1 scheme, and then the side ability, after he schemes, place 1 threat on each other villain's side scheme. And the heroes can discard or spend 2 might or fist resources to discard this card.
Yeah,
so
he's the leader.
Yeah. So how'd you kind of approach the design for the leader of the Wrecking Crew? Was it primarily through these cards, sort of like buffing the rest of this team?
That's a huge part of the design for the Snows. We wanted each villain to have their own feel, because I don't know if we said this already or not, but each villain has their own deck. There isn't one common deck that you're drawing from. So depending on who the active villain is, that not only determines which villain will activate, but it also determines which encounter deck you're drawing cards from. And so we really wanted to lean into that and give each villain in the Wrecking Crew their own niche.
Yeah.
And so Wrecker, in the comics, he is the leader. He's the one who first got the crowbar and then shared his power with the others. And he more or less tells them what to do. And so, his kind of gimmick is that he will activate some of the others sometimes. Like, I think he has a card in his deck that's like, after he goes, another one goes. Or like you saw there, when he schemes, he also places threat on all the others.
Yeah.
So that's kind of his gimmick.
Yeah, definitely. So does that, because he's helping out all of his teammates basically, does that make him kind of the primary target just like naturally, or will you prioritize different villains based on like the hero team makeup?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on your lineup. That's one of the things that we really discussed a lot as a development team too, was like, do we want to have certain villains that protect the others that you always have to go after? And ultimately decided, no, it'd really be fun to just let players decide based on their composition. Like, I think Thunderball is sort of our area of effect kind of damage guy. And now he might not be as bad against someone who's just running a really tanked up hero like She-Hulk or something.
Right.
But he's going to just absolutely destroy like that leadership player who's trying to get all these allies out, and they're all taking this damage every turn.
Yeah.
So in that, depending on what your strategy is, you might prioritize him over Wrecker. And
there might even be some interesting discussions among the players where it's like, oh, you really need like Thunderball to be taken down, but I'm like, Bulldozer is messing me up. And so and then maybe we pair off and like, all right, you handle that, I'll handle this, and like
that's true. You can just like work a little bit at each one of them.
Yeah,
but
that seems like a recipe for failure.
I think we put some cards in there too that actually like power up a little bit as the number of Wrecking Crew villains is decreased. Sort of like you're backing them in a corner. That's where they're the scariest.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we will take a look at that.
Sure.
Let's run down kind of the other villains and a couple of their cards and see sort of what we got. You want to take Thunderball here?
Sure. Yeah. So like I mentioned, he's kind of our area of effect guy. He has 3 scheme. That was kind of fun. I actually didn't, as much as I was aware of who they were, I didn't really know all the characters as well. So it's something that we do as a team. Is research up on him a little bit and found out this guy's got like a PhD.
He's the brain.
He's a real thinker, So we kind of represented that he has the higher scheme value and the slightly lower attack. So as you can see, he also has a Wrecking Crew trait, and his first ability parallels Wrecker's, where when he schemes, it goes on his side scheme rather than the main. But his attack ability is force response after Thunderball attacks you, deal 1 damage to each character you control.
Yeah.
So that one attack at first glance, you're like, oh, that's not so bad, until you realize, oh, no.
Right.
No, every time he attacks me, it's 1 to all my characters.
Yeah, that can be pretty rough.
Yep.
And then his side scheme here, we got Thunderstruck.
Yeah. So Thunderstruck, this same as the other one, it can't leave playable Thunderballs in play. So his ability is actually, and that was kind of fun too. Gamma, he gets some of his powers same like Hulk. That gamma radiation. So his ability is called Gamma Blast. It's a force response. After threat is placed here, if there's 10 or more threat here, stun each friendly character. Remove all but 3 threat from the scheme. So yeah, he's got. That's really gonna hurt you if you. The more people you have in play, the worse that stun gets.
For sure. And then he's got kind of his signature attachment, that ball and chain.
Yeah.
That kind of gets onto him, and so after he attacks, then so it's +1 attack, and then whenever he attacks, it's 1 more threat to the main scheme.
Yeah, so I was going to make a joke about my ex here, and I decided it was in poor taste.
That's probably good.
Yeah. So when he has that forced response after Thunderball attacks, place 1 threat on the main scheme. Again, just another nod to his intelligence, like how quickly he moves on his feet. And adapts to the situation. And this one also has a way to get rid of it, but it's different, from Wreckers. Yeah. So this one says hero action, exhaust your hero, and discard 1 card at random from your hand to get rid of this. So yeah, again, just it's a little harder to get that ball and chain. You really got to wrestle with him to get it away.
Yeah, that's interesting because like a lot of these attachments can be discarded, but typically it's like discard some combination of resources, right? So I like that, like exhaust your hero as well.
Yeah, come to think of it, we looked at Wrecker's command. I think to get the crowbar off of him is a little bit harder too.
Yeah. Well, that one might be for the future, but,
sure, yeah.
but people will see that, I'm sure. So then like another villain here, we've got Pile Driver as well. Who will load in a second. Here we go. So he's 2 scheme, 2 attack. And so he has that same scheme ability. And he just has Retaliate 1. What's Pile Driver's deal? He's like, he's just kind of like a pain to fight.
Yeah, you look at first glance, you're like, did they forget to give him an attack ability? But no, his thing was more, we decided to make him more about counter strikes. So what's kind of funny about Pile Driver, his power is that he has really large hands.
Yeah.
And he punches really hard.
I mean, I can see it in the art. It's almost as big as his head.
Yeah, I think he even has a card that's called like oversized hands or something like that. So yeah, his whole thing is a little bit more of a counter striker. That's the way we decided to interpret his character and his powers. And so there's already a lot going on in the scenario between 4 different scenarios, 4 different schemes, 4 different enemies. So it's kind of important for us to make sure we're not overwhelming the players too. So it's kind of nice to have one guy who's just like, what does he do? Oh yeah, he just retaliate 1.
He just retaliate.
Yeah. The flavor of his character will come through with the cards he reveals.
And then he has his side scheme as well, which is Pilot On. So same thing, can't leave play unless he's there. Starts with 3 threat. If there's 10 or more on it, each player discards the upgrade or support they control with the highest cost. And then it goes back down to 3 threat. So he's just going to break your stuff. Yeah, he's just going to break it in half with those big hands of his. Yeah, and then his card here, Pummel. So that's when he schemes. If you reveal an alter ego, when he schemes, he schemes, and then if he's tough, he gets +2 scheme. In hero form, he attacks, and if he's tough, he gets +2 attack. So I imagine he has a number of cards that can make him tough.
No, we left those out.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, that's a great idea. We should have talked to you. Yeah, for sure. That's kind of his thing.
So how did you, before we get to Bulldozer's cards, how did you really land on giving each villain their own signature scheme? Like, what was kind of the thought with that and how that plays out? Yeah,
I'm trying to think how that came to be. I think Nate did a lot of the initial work on this, and because he was pretty excited, 4 villains, and I think it was just part of his initial vision was like, if we have 4 villains, they should each be, trying to accomplish, sort of a little different thing. Again, just to add more variety and more flavor to it. Yes, I'm sorry, I really don't remember more about that. Other than that, when he brought it to me in Boggs and he was sharing his idea, I was like, that sounds fantastic. Yeah. Like, let's go with that.
Did the identity of the Wrecking Crew come first, or was it we want to have a scenario with a bunch of villains that came first?
Yeah, I think the Wrecking Crew came first. I remember that conversation. It was very, very early on. Like we're not even done designing the core set yet, and we're already mapping out what's going to come after. And we talked about Green Goblin being probably the first adventure pack, just because he's such a well-known and iconic character, and that's actually why he didn't end up being like Spider-Man's nemesis minion. I think a lot of people were surprised when they're like, it's Vulture, not Green Goblin. And it's like, well, we knew we wanted Green Goblin to be one of the first, scenario.
Yeah.
And so we kind of knew what direction we were going to go with that. Mm-hmm. So then it was like, well, what else would be iconic that would also be very different? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I put forth the Wrecking Crew as being like, they're kind of like I said earlier, they're like the oldest team. They've been around forever.
Yeah.
It's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sorry, I got to scroll up to get this question. Sure. Are there 2 scenarios in Wrecking Crew like there are in the Green Goblin pack?
Oh, that's a great question. No, there's only one.
Yeah.
So some of these scenario packs will come with more than one, adventure, and some won't. This one, there just wasn't room. There's a lot of cards that it takes to create this scenario. Like each villain has, it's 4 different encounter decks. 4 different side schemes, 4 different villains with 2 versions of each, plus the main scheme.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on, so that took up a lot of space just to be able to build this scenario.
Right, absolutely. Well, let's look at Bulldozer and kind of round out the rest of the Wrecking Crew. Mm-hmm. So Bulldozer, he's got 1 scheme, 3 attack, same scheme ability, and then Force Interrupt. When he attacks, the attack gains overkill. Mm-hmm. So you can't just throw your little minions in the way or your little allies. And then so he's got a pretty interesting kind of scheme and cards here. So his Clear the Road scheme, after his 10 or more threat on it, each player has to discard the top 10 cards of their deck. Mm-hmm. And then following that...
I love the idea that he's just crashing right through everything you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And then following that with Bull Rush, right? So if you read an Alter Ego, he schemes, and you have to discard the top card of your deck for each threat that's placed. Or if you're a hero, he attacks, and you discard the top card for each damage that's dealt. So each villain has kind of a sub-focus, really, right? Like,
exactly.
Thunderball is like AoE and scheming, and Pile Driver is going to deal more damage and break your stuff.
Yeah, he's a blunt instrument.
Yeah, Bulldozer is going to like mill out your deck. How did you approach making each villain feel unique while also part of the same team and crafting a scenario that like hangs together mechanically?
I think when you start to look at all 4 of them kind of side by side, you'll see that they pretty much got all your strategies covered. Mm. And so that's how we kind of see them as really working as a team. Mm-hmm. Like everything that you're going to bring to this game, there's an answer for it somewhere in their deck, and part of the challenge is figuring out which guy to take out first so that you're not revealing cards from his deck anymore to allow your deck to do what it wants to do. As a team, I think that comes across through, like I said, how they complement each other. Mm-hmm. And then we threw some extra cards into their decks too. I think like they each have their own deck, and it's primarily cards that are unique to that character, but then there are some shared cards between them. I don't know if we're looking at any of those today or not, but they will.
Yeah, we have one.
You'll see some of those allowing them to team up a little bit.
Yeah. So we have a question from Valantru here. Does each encounter deck apply an acceleration token if they're emptied?
Yeah.
But it's important to note that you're not getting 1 from every deck every round, right? It's only the active villain.
Correct. Yeah, you're only drawing off the active deck, and that becomes kind of a fun consideration too. Of like, do we want him to be active? His deck's getting real low.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but those acceleration tokens, those will go on the main scheme. Mm-hmm. So like I said, so that the main scheme will be ticking up a little bit. Mm-hmm. But like you see, they're not actually scheming onto the main scheme; they're scheming onto their side scheme. Mm-hmm.
And you can play, or you choose who you deal damage to, right?
Correct.
You can attack anyone, not just the active villain.
Yeah, we like I said earlier, like I think we tried a different version where it was kind of limited to you could only attack the active, and it didn't feel empowering and it didn't feel fast paced and exciting. So we said it doesn't fit our vision for the game, and we cut it out. We opened it up to attack whoever you want, and people started responding to that. Like, that feels a lot better. I like being able to choose who I want to go after.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. That's really cool. So what's the experience of playing this scenario like when you have different villains becoming the active villain, they're attacking you in different ways. You can't necessarily predict what is about to happen. It seems like there's a lot of replayability there because of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, one of the big factors for replayability is which villain you choose to target down first, or whether or not you even choose to target down one, or rather just kind of spread out damage all across them. Mm-hmm. But also, there were turns where we would talk about like, all right, we really don't want this guy to be active, so let's scheme down or thwart down his scheme, and let's go after this other guy instead. And then there were cards that would come up and basically say like, all right, do this thing, and now make this other guy the active villain.
Sure.
And so that would throw your whole play. You're like, oh no, that's exactly what we didn't want to happen.
Yeah.
So it really was fun to see those moments where people felt like they were more or less in control. They're like, all right, we got this now, and then the deck would react to what was happening, and suddenly it was this big surprise moment of like, oh my gosh, they're really fighting back.
Yeah.
So I really like that. So yeah, it will really play different depending on when and if those cards come up and what the situation is on the table at that time.
So we went over this a little bit, but as some people are asking again about just how to track the HP of all these villains.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you suggest, right? Like dice, you could use pen and paper.
Yeah, so just imagine like if you and I were playing and we each have our own core set.
Yeah.
Then we would probably just each of us take a large dial for our hero and then give the little
use
dials,
the hero dials
to the villains.
Yeah.
That was one way to do it.
Yep.
You can use the damage tokens. There's plenty of damage tokens
Yeah.
in the box. Or oftentimes when we're playtesting, we just like to use dice for stuff, especially when components don't exist yet, like in the early development process for the core set, we didn't have any punch. We didn't even know what the tokens looked like yet, so we did a lot of dice. And we find most gamers have dice.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's usually a handy way. And then there's always the old pen and paper method.
Yeah. I mean, just having all of the hero dials, and that's just a really easy way right there. So then there are some cards we sort of mentioned that are shared among all of the decks, such as Buddy System.
I love the name of that card.
Yeah.
It sounds so friendly. Oh, it's the Buddy System.
They have such a nice
and they look at the
buddy
art
system.
like, oh, that is not a friendly card. That's the wrong kind of Buddy System.
Do you want to give that card a read?
Sure. So this is a treachery. It says, when revealed, choose the villain whose side scheme has the least threat. Reveal the top card of his deck. Top 2 cards instead if he's the only villain in play.
So that's kind of what you were mentioning.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that catch-up mechanic. So just when you think you're really doing well, you flip this card, and now you've doubled the amount of reveals that you have that turn.
Yeah.
And also, too, if it's sort of like, hey, we're gonna really try to lock down Thunderball, so we never have to reveal one of his cards. We'll make sure that he never gets too much threat on his scheme, and then you flip this one off of like Pile Driver's deck.
Right.
And then it's like, oh man, Thunderball's doing his thing after all. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the boost effect on this card does that switching up who's active.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so it really was rewarding. Like sometimes we try things and they don't really work the way we want to, and so we change it up. This was one of those things where once we added this idea of the active villain could change unexpectedly. When it started coming up in testing, right away the reaction was perfect. It was just like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. We thought we had him, and oh no, now it's him. And so that was a lot of fun.
So Buddy System being one of those cards that's shared between each villain's deck. Tell me about designing that card and the other cards that are shared across the decks. How did you decide what cards would be shared? How did that change the experience of the scenario?
It kind of goes back to your question of like, how are they a team working? They each have their own thing, and we've more or less covered that pretty well already in our conversation. So the team thing came from like, they should all have something they do as the Wrecking Crew. This idea that it's not just one villain on their own, it's all 4 of them together. And so like Buddy System was a great example of that, of how like these guys are working together. Wrecker started out active, we're revealing cards off his deck. Buddy System comes out of his deck and he teams up with Pile Driver to get you, and now Pile Driver's active. So anything that was kind of felt like this is something they should all be able to do. And then there's other cards too that aren't just all about them either. It's like the story takes place on, I think, Riker's Island, and they're breaking out of the jail, and so there's other prisoners and things like that too. And so those are getting shuffled into each of their decks too, just to kind of help build the story a little bit, and also put minions into play.
So to follow up on kind of what you said there, you can't play this. You can't play the villains separately, right? Or that's not the design of the scenario, right?
Right.
You couldn't be like, I'm just gonna fight Pile Driver.
I mean,
like you could.
You could mod it yourself, I guess. That's one of the... honestly, that is the strength of a co-op game, is that people at home can really play however they want. I promise I'm not going to come to your house and tell you you're playing wrong.
We'll break the door down and take your cards away.
Be like that old Kool-Aid commercial. It's like busted. Oh, yeah!
Unless you can produce your proof of purchase token.
You're playing it wrong. No, that's what's great. I'm sure there's a way you could mod this scenario to just play one at a time, if that was something that sounded like fun to do. It would probably work okay, barring the effects that change the villain. That might be a fun, just quick and dirty. You know, I want to play in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Give it a try. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So then each one has their own encounter deck. So there aren't any modular sets in this scenario pack either.
Correct. Yeah, that was kind of a weird thing that we grappled with for a long time. Was like, how would you modify this set? And ultimately, like, we didn't include any modular sets or any like official rules for like, here's how to do it. But we talked about it a lot, and ultimately too, we were like, well, if people really want to do that, if something they really want to do, again, you can kind of make up your own rules. You can imagine just taking an encounter set and just divvying them up, you know, one here, one here, one here, one here, until you're out of cards, and just see how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone asks, Weapon Taco, so now there are more villains revealed than superheroes. Are you going to reveal any new heroes soon? So we've kind of teased that Thor is the next hero that we're revealing. So we'll have more to share on that like next month. After this stream, which is just about wrapping up here, we'll have the Wrecking Crew announcement article going up on our website. So there'll be more new cards that you guys can see there with regards to that. Get an even better sense of sort of how this scenario works. Is there anything that you really want to say to the fans before we wrap it up?
I have some questions.
Oh, you have some questions?
So you mentioned the modular encounter sets. What about like hero obligations? How do those fit in?
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to remember.
We have the rules.
We would need the rules. Yeah, I was like, that's a fantastic question, and I'm sure it's addressed somewhere. I can't remember. If you just don't use
Nemesis cards and obligations are not used when playing this scenario.
There it is. Nice and clean. You just don't use them.
You know, Tony Stark has no business problems.
It's a very short fight.
Yeah.
The rent can wait. Yeah, that was another one. It just seemed cleanest, like the cleanest way to do it would just to say just set them aside and don't worry about it. Again, though, it's like for players that want to modify the experience. Welcome to experiment however you like. Yeah. Were there any more questions there, Derek?
That was the major one I saw.
Okay.
All right.
I assume the standard encounter set is the same as modular encounter sets.
Right, yeah, you actually don't use the standard encounter set in this adventure.
Each villain just has their own set deck, and that
is kind of one nice thing about it if you look at it from that way. It's very self-contained.
Yeah.
You just grab this pack, set it up and play without needing to grab cards from anywhere else.
Yeah. I know that I always appreciate that for sure.
Cool.
Well, awesome.
There's a question. Without the standard encounter set, without modular encounter sets, is this encounter even difficult, Caleb?
Is it even difficult? I will let you find out.
You know, Caleb worked on another IP that's really difficult. Right?
Seems difficult. Seems difficult. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, so much for watching. We stream every Tuesday and Thursday, so make sure you subscribe, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post new videos. Thanks to Carolina Game Tables for this excellent streamer table. Come back on Thursday. We're doing the third session of our Genesis RPG that we are doing. We just had a big twist happen at the end of the last session, so tune in to see the fallout of that. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Links in the description. We'll see you next time.